Welcome to Movie Recap. In this episode, we look at a 2023 series, The Rig, a supernatural thriller. The show takes us to an oil rig in the North Sea, the Kinloch Bravo. We meet the crew, who are prepping to go home after months of hard work. Unfortunately, Magnus Macmillan, the rig manager, is on the phone with head office, receiving bad news that the helicopters are being diverted to another rig due to an emergency, and his crew will have to wait. Just then, we see the phone lines and other networks facing disturbances. Magnus and his assistant Rose go to see Fulmar, the comms officer, who is also unsure of the communication fault. In the crew meeting, he informs them of the emergency on the North Killscore platform and that they will have to wait to get home. Just as the crew starts to protest, the power goes out. Magnus orders blackout recovery procedures to come into effect. Reaching the control room, they find out that there is pressure building up in the wells and that the generators are down. Backup power is holding for now. On the way to check on the production module, Alwyn Evans sees the module on the northern rig also with high pressure. Reaching module control, he notifies Magnus of the tremors, and that pressure is reaching critical level. Despite Rose's protest, Magnus orders Alwyn to shut the module down. With the pressure under control, the generators are back online, though the radios are still down. Attempting to re-establish contact, Magnus takes the sat phone and heads to the helideck to get better signals. Just then, a second wave of tremors hits the rig, more volatile than the last. The crew on deck brace themselves. As the tremors subside and Magnus attempts to use the sat phone, he and the crew notice an unprecedented event. A large cloud of fog is approaching the rig, engulfing everything in sight. Soon, the entire rig is shrouded in the mysterious fog. Alwyn informs them that the shake was not from the drill, as they are shut down. In any case, with communications not working, Magnus asks Fulmar and Baz, a young tech, to go and check the comms tower. Reaching the top, Fulmar and Baz reset the comms tower and everything appears to work properly. On the way down, Baz loses his grip and falls to deck. The medic is called in to help treat him and move him to Med Bay. Fulmar mentions he couldn't see anything and that Baz was just behind him. Upon reaching the Med Bay, Kat stabilizes Baz but is unable to do more without a surgery room and says they need to evac him as soon as possible. Rose informs Magnus that this is not an isolated event, and the entire field is offline. Sometime later, Baz wakes up and starts having visions of the seafloor coming apart. Unhappy with the hopeless situation of his friend, Lars Hutton goes to Magnus to demand more action. Unable to do more, Magnus leaves his office, giving Lars the opportunity to see a classified memo, which makes him infuriated. He assembles everyone on deck and tells them the company has been planning to shut the rigs down and they might be losing their jobs soon. Magnus confesses to keeping the memo secret, but assures everyone that he will do everything to get them back to land safely. Just then, we see black ash falling from the sky, and Baz somehow has managed to get to the helideck. In a delirious state, he mentions that it's too late and it has already begun. Later, when Baz wakes up in the med bay, he informs them that he is having visions and that there is a wave coming. She mentions to Rose that with his injuries, he shouldn't be able to walk, and somehow he is healing rapidly. Baz wakes soon after and examines his wounds healing. Some glowing spores are helping him recover. While in the rec room, the crew notice the standby vessel trying to communicate with them using signal lights. Alwyn asks Lek to go to deck and take note of the messages being transmitted in Morse code. Fulmar translates the message to read a distress call, while Magnus orders him to use the deck lights to establish communication with the support vessel. As a precaution, Magnus goes to the cafeteria and tells the chef Murch to start rationing as they don't know when rescue will arrive. Meanwhile, we see Lars is being kept in isolation for his insubordination. He is being guarded by Esther, while Dunlin, the safety officer, brings him some food. He asks to be let out, to which Dunlin says he has to stay here for now. Baz wakes up later to see most of his injuries have healed. He starts having visions, this time about the rig being destroyed by a huge wave. He scrambles back to his room and starts having pain as his gold tooth is pushed out of his body. Meanwhile, Rose gathers some ash for analysis and tells Magnus to keep everyone inside. Fulmar tells them that the support vessel is also without any external comms, and if they wait till morning, they won't be able to communicate with the signal lights. If they want evac, it would have to be tonight. Magnus tells him to start guiding them in. Alwyn finds Baz in a control tower, drawing strange symbols on the window. Baz tells him his head is full of noise and that he shouldn't have healed from his fall this fast. Something is not right. He tells Alwyn that danger is coming. Before Alwyn can ask him more, Baz starts having visions and runs away. Feeling unwell, Lek goes to the infirmary. When no one is there, he steals some alcohol. Something in the ash is affecting him. He starts bleeding in the shower and the ink in his tattoos starts coming off. When he's found dead later, Kat is called in, but can't find any cause for his bleeding till Dunlin comes, showing them the gold tooth he found in Baz's room. They conclude something is pushing inorganic material out of their bodies. Meanwhile, Lars manages to escape his room through the window. Fulmar notices his flashlight out on the bridge and takes Alwyn to go investigate. Once they're outside, Lars locks the hatch and heads to the control room and signals an SOS to the support vessel, causing them to try docking at full speed. Alwyn and Fulmar notice the message and rush to get back inside but are locked out. Fulmar injures his hand while Alwyn goes to find another entry point. Catching wind of the situation, Magnus unlocks the hatch, letting Fulmar in while Dunlin finds Lars in the control room. Reaching the control room, Magnus asks Lars to stand down as they need to correct the vessel's course. Meanwhile, Alwyn finds Baz outside, saying he needs to see the life in the water that started it all. When he refuses to come inside and Alwyn grabs him, Baz snaps, and when he grabs Alwyn, we see water spurting out of his mouth. When Dunlin reaches them, Baz runs away. Kat comes to help Alwyn, but he is already dead by drowning. While studying the ash, Rose finds that it reacts with blood. She explains to Magnus and Kat, the ash contains living organisms. It's partly made up of spores and attach themselves to organic substances, then repair damages and drives out impurities, like Baz's fillings and Lek's tattoos. They conclude, the spores want a healthy host for some unknown reason. Rose adds that the level of infection can depend on the exposure to open wounds, and they should keep an eye on some of their crew. In the morning, while the crew is in the cafeteria, Dunlin notices the fog is dispersing. The crew is happy about this turn of events until they spot the northern rig on fire. Heather suggests helping them with their own lifeboats, but Dunlin mentions that they aren't designed for precise navigation. Lars further mentions, with a fire that size, there can't be many survivors. Following up yesterday's findings, Rose tells Magnus of her plans to identify infected members of the crew by using Baz's blood sample to see if it reacts with the blood of other test subjects. Magnus tells her to go ahead. Fulmar finds Baz in the lab, going through Rose's research. He offers him assistance and tells him they will help him but need to focus on getting to land. Baz mentions he can't go back as the visions are guiding him for some objective. When Rose arrives, she sees Baz taking his own blood sample. When she mentions they need the sample, Baz takes off. After losing Baz's sample, Magnus orders everyone with injuries to be isolated and tested for the infection while calling for another crew meeting. As the ash and fog has dissipated, Magnus tells half the crew to start disinfecting the ship while the other half searches for Baz. We see Baz going into a lower area in the rig where he touches the water tanks to add spores to them. As the team starts searching for Baz, James finds the tanks and calls for the crew, but before they arrive, Baz rushes him. When Lars and Dunlin finally reach James, they spot plant mass growing in the tanks. In the lab, Rose discovers that the spores have been found in geological surveys before, and that they originate from periods in history where the Earth underwent mass extinction events. These spores are from the last event that was 300 million years ago, where nearly 95% of all life was eradicated. She also mentioned that these deposits have been found under the entire rig field. Meanwhile, Heather, Easter, and Murch also see plant life growing out of the oil tanks in the machine room. Just then, another earthquake jolts the rig. As everyone braces themselves, Dunlin notices James holding something in his hand when he asks him to show him. It's a tooth filling, indicating James might be infected. Scared, James attacks Dunlin and runs away. The tremors cause the rig's power to go out again. Magnus tasks Fulmar with getting the power back online. Once power is restored, they discover that the flare on the production module has gone out and they have a small amount of time to disconnect it before it explodes. With the manual controls being inaccessible, Fulmar volunteers to reignite the flare by hand. During all this, Heather finds Baz in the mud pit section of the rig. He tells her that an ancient memory is communicating with him and that he has to protect whatever is under the seabed. If he is unable, the ancient intelligence will wipe out everything in its path. We also see James has joined with Baz in his attempts. Heather is unsure of how to take this information, but as Lars comes looking for her, Baz and James run away. To restart the module, Esther operates the crane to get Fulmar closer. Unlocking his harness to get a better shot, he fires and successfully restarts the flare, but the blowback comes right at him and he sustains injuries. He is taken to medbay to help him recover. Baz finds a new piece of equipment in the wellhead which no one was aware about. He realizes that this is what's causing the disturbances on the seabed and tries to shut it down. He is unable to as the pipe into the seafloor is still pressurized. Only way to shut it down would be to close the pipe at the source. Feeling better, Fulmar decides to help Rose and Heather in the lab. He starts drawing the same circular symbols as Baz had. Just then, they are called to the control room. They learn that pressure in the wells is incredibly high as Baz is trying to bypass the safeties. They can't take control away from him remotely, so they decide to send a ROV to the seabed to close the well. Guided by Esther, the ROV gets images from the seabed, showing them large circular structures made by the earthquakes, like the images Baz and Fulmar had drawn. They use the ROV to manually close the wellhead, controlling the pressure, but as James tries to disconnect the cables, the device gets primed and they cannot shut it off. They would need Fulmar's help to bypass the mechanism. Shortly after these events, the communications come back online. Phone and radio signals are working again. Magnus quickly tries to contact the Coast Guard while the crew try to get in touch with their families. Fulmar searches for information on the significance of the circles while Rose finds a classified project on the company's network which would explain the unknown control panel and containers found on the rig. Kat learns from her family that the strange fog is now approaching the mainland. Just then, they lose comms again. As Fulmar has the spore infection, Baz tries to communicate with him. Fulmar notices his wounds healing quicker and hears Baz's voice in his head, startling him. He tells Rose about his visions and leaves a note as he goes on to see Baz in the mud pit. Kat and Rose try to follow him and come across the spores which seem to notice that Kat is pregnant. While outside, the crew notice lights approaching the rig. Suspecting it's the support vessel, they get excited and start making preparations to leave. But as it gets closer, they notice it's a life raft from the other rig. When the survivors come on board, Rose meets Coke, the head of the company's research division, who demands to be taken to the control room. Reaching the control room, Rose asks what caused the fire on the other rig. Coke tells them they had a pressure failure which caused an explosion. When she asks what research he was doing, he refuses to explain, telling them they need to regain control of the production module. Undergoing a medical examination, Harish, a member of the other rig, tells them a different story. After Coke arrived, he was drafted to help him with new equipment tests. Instead of extracting oil, they were sending something down. That's when the fog started, but Coke remained calm as if he expected it. Pressure spiked, but Coke ignored this, causing the explosion. Going through the company network, Heather, Esther, and Harish learn that Coke was using an alias account to communicate with head office. They find his emails telling the company that the organism has already spread, meaning that Coke and the company had already known. Meanwhile, in the lab, Rose and Kat are trying to figure out the significance of the circles on the seafloor. They notice the similarity to the circles in tree trunks, which could indicate a measure of time. With this revelation, Rose notes that the gap between each of the rings matches the time between each of the mass extinction events, thus indicating that the last circle is the present and that it's closing to predict another mass extinction event. Coke mentions that infected people had opened up the wells in the other rig, causing the explosion there. Not convinced, Rose asks him about Project Siren and the unknown equipment on board the rig, but he is evasive. He asks Magnus to send people to take control of the production module, but Magnus refuses, saying it's dangerous with the spore infestation. When Fulmar reaches the mud pit, Baz and James explain to him that they are trying to repair the damage done, and that this new control mechanism has something to do with it. They need his help to disable it before someone activates it remotely and causes more harm to whatever is under the seafloor, waking it up. Fulmar agrees, but is unable to as pressure alarms start blaring, but he tries to find another approach. While all this is going on, Lars finds Coke as he is unhappy with Magnus's management. Coke sees this as an opportunity and recruits Lars, Dunlin, and Murch. He says they can add the secret containers to the mud pit's ventilation system to take Baz down. When they ask what's in the containers, he says it's simple carbon monoxide which reacts with the spores. When they find the containers, Dunlin gets suspicious as there is something else mixed with the CO2, but Lars convinces him to continue. They reach the mud pit and connect the containers to the vents and wear masks to protect themselves. James goes to find out what's going on and finds the three at the vent controls. He suddenly coughs up blood. They quickly realize that the gas isn't just knocking him out, but killing him and the spores. This was Coke's plan all along. Lars and Murch run away while Dunlin stays and tries to help James. Fulmar tries to shut off the vents, but both him and Baz pass out from the gas. Kat finds Coke closing the mud pit's doors. Lars and Murch manage to get out, but Dunlin gets trapped inside. As his O2 tank runs empty, he suffocates and dies. Heather, Esther, and Harish tell Magnus and Rose about Coke. When they confront him, Coke defends his actions as survival. Learning what has happened, Rose goes to the mud pit to rescue Fulmar. She shuts down the ventilation system manually and shares her mask with Fulmar, but it doesn't work. But as she accidentally touches the plants, the spores react, and Fulmar regains consciousness. While they escape the mud pit, Baz also wakes up to the vision of the final ring closing. Magnus meets with Harish to understand what really happened on the northern rig. He learns that Coke had supervised installation of new equipment to the wellhead. They added some canisters to the line and injected the contents to the seafloor. The pressure spiked well above shutdown protocol, but Coke ordered them to continue. Even when pressure reached critical levels, Coke ordered them not to shut down. This caused a massive explosion which destroyed half the rig. He also tells him, after the explosion there was only one lifeboat left and Coke launched it as soon as he got on board, meaning he left people behind to die. When he interrogates Coke, he tells Magnus that it was through company mandate that he eliminate the spores to continue oil production. However, the situation is much more critical now as the spores can spread all over the world and his actions are driven by pure survival. He mentions that spores will contaminate all the water and food sources on the mainland, and the only way to stop it is to destroy it here. Learning the gravity of the situation, Magnus asks Rose if they should help him eliminate the spores, but she tells him what he's been doing is instead causing the spores to get aggressive, and that it had been trying to communicate through Baz and others from the start, but they didn't realize this. They are left with a hard choice. Debating what they should do, Magnus says Coke has material that could destroy the spores, but Rose counters saying that this organism has had millions of years to grow and could be under the ocean all over the world. Destroying it here would only cause infestation somewhere else. She goes on to mention that they need to try and make contact through Baz to show they are not a threat. Coke dismisses this and says, when two intelligent species meet, they will try to destroy each other and their plan will only waste more time. Rose tells Magnus to try and communicate through Baz and he gives them the go-ahead. After the meeting, Coke activates a secret protocol on his phone. Baz is having visions of the seafloor coming apart. Unsure of what to do, he tries to re-establish communication with the entity, but the rig is jolted by massive tremors. Harish goes to the control room where he meets Coke. Coke tells him choppers are en route to rescue him, and if he wants a ride, he needs to help him finish his mission. Suspecting he wants to destroy the rig to cover it all up. He activates the speaker system before making him admit everything for everyone to hear, especially that the choppers are coming to evac Coke and he plans to leave everyone behind. Magnus, Rose, and Fulmar enter the pit looking for Baz where they find him in a troubled state. He tells them that it's too late and the entity is not communicating anymore. Just then, the rig is hit with more massive tremors, shaking the foundation and threatening to break it apart. Coke throws Harish out of his way and starts the process that threatens to blow up the rig. At the same time, he gets the call from the choppers that they are almost there. Rose makes one final attempt to communicate with the spores, but the tremors get worse. Fulmar grabs Rose and they run for the exit. Baz decides to stay back to show the spores that humans are capable of sacrifice. When Coke reaches the helideck, Lars is waiting there for him. Enraged at how he used them as cannon fodder, he nearly throws him off but is convinced by the others to let him face charges instead. He gives him a good punch anyways. On the way to the helideck, Magnus, Rose, and Fulmar see a huge tsunami on the horizon. They reach the last helicopter and escape just in time as the tsunami hits the rig and collapses it all. At the same time, we see Baz become one with the spores. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.